Emily, welcome to the Culture Coach podcast. It is so great to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Wendy.
So let's dig right in. I love to talk culture, and you have some great experience with startups and some startups with really great culture. So I'm excited to dig in with you on this topic. And let's just start with what is there like a defining moment or a time in your career when you just realized just the importance of culture?
Yeah, I think very, very, very early on in my career, I when I graduated from college, I was pretty convinced that I wanted to work for nonprofits. So I grew up on the East Coast. I moved to New York City, got a great job in the development department of a nonprofit, and was doing, very entry level development work. We've all had entry level jobs, but was really excited about the mission and excited about the work. Was there for a year, and I will never forget going to my boss's office at the end of the year and saying, that was really fun. Here are some things I think could make next year more interesting or could improve the work that we do. And I was met with almost a like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, we have our calendar year. We know what
Mm.
we're doing every year. We always run the same events. We always run the same, mail campaigns. We always do everything the same. And all of a sudden I was hit with this feeling of like, oh no, like this is not this is not the environment that I want to be working in. And decided pretty quickly that I wanted to be somewhere a little bit more dynamic that allowed for some flexibility and some change and some ideas. Because I just felt very it was striking to me how actually like suffocated I felt
Mhm.
and how
Mhm.
stuck I felt. And just happened to have a friend who worked at a tech startup, which some folks are probably familiar with. My first tech startup was Seamless, the food delivery website.
Okay.
And so I very, very, very quickly got a taste for this like very opposite world where at tech startups, things are changing all the time. People are really hungry for ideas. People are really open to experimentation and things changing. And I, despite sort of the chaos of working at tech startups, I've never looked back, and that's where I've been for the last 15 or so years of my career has been a few different startups.
Awesome. And so how many would you say? Um,
I think I've worked for four different tech startups at this
wow.
point. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And so I'm really curious about where you are now. Hugging Face,
Yeah.
is that the name of the company?
hmm
Okay. So tell me about that.
Yep. It's quite a silly but sticky name.
Hmm.
The reason for the name might give you a sense of who our founders are. So we have three founders. And the reason they chose Hugging Face is it's the name of the emoji that has its hand sticking out to the side and is sort of smiling. And they want to be the first company to be publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange with an emoji instead of an acronym. And
That's
that's the
awesome.
entire reason for the name. And so I actually am just almost this week celebrating my 3-year anniversary at Hugging Face, which is very
Awesome.
exciting. And for those of you that have worked in startups, you will know that 3 years is a lifetime. I am one of the oldest tenured folks at the company. When I joined, it was about 20 people, and now we're up to about 350. So some
Wow.
serious growth, and it's been a really fun time. But I think the story of why I joined, if we have
Yeah.
time to tell it
Yes.
quickly, is paints a really interesting picture of the culture at Hugging Face. Um, Almost my entire career has been spent in like customer facing roles, whether it's just straight up answering 800 number from customer service or handling some high level enterprise clients, generally people facing, but on the customer side. When I first got in touch with the CEO, Clement at Hugging Face, was sort of chatting with him about moving to sort of the internal people side of things, whether it was recruiting or employee engagement or working sort of more on this space, which was a career change that I had been looking to make for a long time. But after we'd been chatting for a little while and he was making it clear that he was open to me joining and was wanting me to help build the team, I essentially said, this sounds like a really amazing opportunity and I'm excited to join, but I need you to know that I've never actually done this. I don't have any hands-on experience doing this kind of work. And I more or less could have joined on the spot based on his response, which was, I don't care. He's like, I'm not really worried about the work that you've done in the past. I'm much more concerned about what you can achieve while you're here. So why not, have us give it a shot and see what happens. And that perspective made me just really excited to join a company that was like interested in what people can achieve and how that
Yes.
is distinctly separate from what you've been doing in the past.
I love that. I actually pivoted I've had many pivots in my career,
Yep.
and my pivot to tech actually happened. I was in nonprofit, and I had done event planning. I mean, all of these different things. But there was a tech company here locally, in San Antonio called Rackspace. They were about 1,000 employees, and, I just heard really great things about the culture, and I really wanted to work there. And I interviewed, and I remember everyone was casual and I came in a
Yeah.
suit, and I was like, I promise I don't have to wear a suit. Like, I can be casual too. Like, I wanted so bad. Yeah, I had no tech. My point is I had no tech experience, and they
Yeah.
hired me because they knew my work ethic and
Yeah.
that I was going to be a good culture fit, even though I didn't have the tech experience. And I ended up staying there 7 years and had a great,
Awesome.
great career there. So I love that. I get that. Tell me a little bit about that culture at Hugging Face.
Yeah, it's very, very unique. The second reason I decided to join during that conversation with the CEO is he was describing how Hugging Face is set up in a super decentralized manner. And so the easiest way that I can sort of describe what that means is that instead of being sort of the companies that I've worked for in the past have this very like pyramid shape to them with the CEO sitting at the top, and the CEO will set goals for the company, which then the next level will set goals for their team, and it has this sort of cascading effect. A decentralized company is actually more or less flipped. So our CEO is not setting goals for each of the teams. The teams are setting their own goals. And even more granular than that, our teams are actually deciding their own projects. They're choosing what they think will be impactful. I guess I should take one quick step back and just say that Hugging Face is an open source AI platform. And
Okay.
so many of our employees, the 90% of our employees are machine learning engineers who do amazing work creating open science, creating models, creating data sets. And what that means is that our engineers and our teams that are small, usually 3, 4, maybe 5 people max, decide what they think is the latest and greatest tech, what people are so excited about right now, and it allows us to move really quickly, and it allows people to make their own decisions, decide what projects are working, decide which projects are not. And it just sort of frees up our CEO to just talk about the exciting things that our team is doing instead of him being a non-expert. He's not a machine learning engineer. And he's like, I shouldn't be the one making these choices.
Mhm.
It should be the folks that are actually doing the work. And so it's very cool in that there's so much freedom and autonomy and independence. And at the same time, I will say it's actually not for everybody because some folks prefer to have a little bit of direction.
Mhm.
Some folks don't always thrive in an environment where the pressure is on them to come up with the
Mhm.
next project, to decide what they should be working on. And so it's definitely, got a both sides situation to it. But this decentralized structure has been a really fun one to be working in.
I love that. I've heard of companies, testing that, and
Yeah.
it is such, I believe that um the makeup of organizations today, it needs to shift, right? The way that
Yeah.
we have been working, our way of working needs to change. Aside from, I mean, in addition to the more remote flexibility, I just think the whole structure needs to be reconsidered. And I love that the organization is doing that. Is it all self motivation and self accountability, or is there a management level at all?
There is. So we do have a leadership team. It
Okay.
comprises of maybe 7 or 8 people. So it's fairly small. Most of the organization is pretty flat. And part of the reason for that is because our team setup are so small.
Okay.
It like we have about 350 people that work for Hugging Face right now, and our project teams are maybe 4 or 5 people each. And so
Okay.
if each one of our project teams had a manager, we would have a very manager heavy company.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the reason why our structure is so flat. But the way it works is that generally, part of the reason why I say it's not an environment for everybody is because in addition to doing great work, you also have to work very strongly to be your own advocate. Um, we this is going to sound like I'm going to go on a tangent, but I swear it's coming back to the actual question. We Part of the decentralization is that we also don't have a marketing team. And so part of your job, everybody's job at Hugging Face, is to be your own marketer. And
Ah,
so if you build an machine learning audio space that can help folks create music, something very generic. Um, you build it, great. You also have to tell everybody about it. And so
mhm.
our engineers will get on Reddit, they'll get on Twitter, they'll get on different social media spaces, GitHub, even our own platform has a community aspect to it. And it is part of your job, it's built into your job description to communicate about the things that you're doing well. And that actually relates to your question of whether or not anybody is sort of watching to see if you're
Yeah. Yeah.
doing work. Is if you want to be successful at Hugging Face, you have to be comfortable with self promotion.
Hmm.
And so you have to be willing to take the time to tell your leadership, like that you're the one person who represents your project teams. Here's all the awesome stuff that I've done in the past 3 months, 6 months, whatever the time is, because it's the only way that you will get a raise at Hugging Face. And because the project teams are so small, it's really not possible to just sort of be skirting along
Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
culture. I'm sure many of the people that you speak to talk about this, but a lot of that question can be solved with hiring, right? If we're really, really, really upfront with folks and make sure they know that this is sort of a high octane and can be a stressful environment, but you have a ton of freedom, and make sure that we're very clear about what our culture is up front. We do a pretty good job of hiring those self motivated folks that really thrive in this environment.
How do you do that? Are you looking for certain competencies? Is it, how do you ensure that you're doing that?
It's funny. In some ways, a lot we are since we are an open source platform, we actually are often able to hire people that we see doing the work already, which is
Yeah.
kind of fascinating. And what that means generally is that if someone is already working on a project with our team members on our platform, they're generally doing it in their free time, which means that they're doing something that they enjoy. And we also get the chance to see not only see their coding skills, but also see how they interact with other people.
Hmm.
And so it's worked out really well for us to be able to, and I do understand that that's a very unique situation to be in, that we have the opportunity to see someone do the work
Yeah.
before we hire them. But it's also my favorite kind of hire, because even just to have the conversation where
Yeah.
you give the job offer, because what you're doing to somebody is you say, hey, this thing that you really enjoy, that's a hobby of yours, we want to pay you for it.
Yeah.
And in addition, we're fully remote, we're global, you can do the work whenever you want, as long as you get it done. Are you interested in joining us? And you can imagine how a computer scientist or machine learning engineer is so excited by that prospect of I can do a thing that I like and I can do it when I want. Like
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah.
And it's been a really, really quite lovely to be able to hire people that way.
Yeah. That sounds amazing. And
Yeah.
so, what is the role of the people team there?
Totally good question. Just like every startup I've worked for, it has shifted as the
Yeah.
company's needs shifted. When I started 3 years ago, I was very heavily focused on recruiting and talent and building the teams. We were just at that point just needing good people.
Yeah.
And so that was the focus. And so we grew really, really quickly in that first year. We also, during that time, brought on a couple of technical recruiters who are just better, faster, stronger than I am at reading machine learning engineer resumes. And so they've taken over a lot of that sort of like frontline recruiting responsibility. Um, and I've shifted a lot more into employee engagement and also DEIB work. So I've been pretty heavily focused on diversity work. Um, and doing that at Hugging Face has also been really fascinating because while I'm focused internally on the team, and that means sort of what I think of like, I don't know, I need a better phrase than like old school DEIB approaches, which is, trainings and conversations
Yeah.
and how do we hire thoughtfully and all of those pieces. It also means that my focus has been on the machine learning and AI community as a whole.
Mhm.
Because we are this open source platform, it means that I want the people on our platform, not just our employees, to be a representation of the diverse products and data sets and whatnot that we are creating.
Yeah.
um, and so in addition to being focused on all those things internally, I for the last probably 6 months specifically have been very heavily focused on getting more women to engage on the Hugging Face platform. The percent of women that engage in open source platforms is really, really, really low. We don't know exactly the number, but it's definitely under 10%.
Yeah.
Um, and that means that we don't have representation that we want
Yeah.
on our platform. And so I do lots of talks about how open source can help your career. I talk about how easy it is to get started on Hugging Face with lots of different, women in tech organizations in
Mhm.
an attempt to sort of close that gap as much as possible.
That's great. And
Yeah.
is there anything that you're working on from a culture perspective, like bringing those women in? How do they, in probably a male dominated, those teams are probably, the project teams are probably male dominated. Like, how do you
Yeah.
ensure that sense of belonging for women coming in?
Yeah, it's a great question. We do have a very, very strong, like women employee resource group. We don't call them employee resource groups, but for all intents and purposes, that's what it is. And as you can imagine, the women who decide to work at Hugging Face are usually pretty independent and strong women anyway. But we still all very heavily rely on this group of folks, even if it's just uh, it's very infrequently like letting off steam,
Yeah.
but it's served a couple of different functions. One might be, I'm feeling some imposter syndrome. Can you folks just like talk me up a little bit and tell me I do a great job? Which are maybe some of my most fun posts or some of my most fun things to engage with. To, hey, I was at this conference last week and the moderator didn't let me speak as much as he let the men on the
Mm,
panel speak. And I would like to know, is there a professional way to handle this after the fact. And I think it is a really powerful group of people that can help women as they join
Yeah.
Hugging Face. I also think working on diversity in a decentralized organization, in a decentralized culture, has been really great. Because I think about it, if you are, I was going to say if you're working on the diversity team at a company, but more likely than not, it's usually you are the diversity person
Right.
at a company. And if you are responsible for all of the programs and all of the diversity projects and all of the diversity goals, it's very difficult to actually get teams to engage with your work,
Mhm.
to engage with your content. One of the first things I did when I started to work on diversity at Hugging Face was get rid of our diversity, equity, and inclusion Slack channel
Mm.
because it just turns into an echo chamber, right? The only people in that channel are the people who already care
Mhm.
about DEI work. And it just means that you're centralizing those conversations so that the rest of the company can't see it.
Yeah.
So instead of having DEI conversations about hiring in the diversity channel, we have them in the hiring channel instead.
I
And
love
it
that.
disperses the responsibility.
Yes.
And even if what it means is you only have one person who's paying attention on each of these project teams, it means that I've multiplied my impact by, those 40 people across the company. And it
Yes.
means that
Yeah.
those people can have conversations that I'm not physically able to have in 40 different places at once. And
Right.
so we've sort of created this like DEI as a service model where like I'm around to answer questions or like spark ideas or create content, right? Like create our trainings, but it's our individual teams that are actually running with the work. And I've seen it work really well. And our folks are incredibly thoughtful people.
It makes sense because from what I know about ERGs and diversity, like it should be the ERGs at least should be this grassroots, right?
Yeah,
Sure, there can be sponsors, but it shouldn't be driven by leadership. It should be driven by the people that want to engage and find that sense of belonging. And so to have the fact that your entire organization is decentralized really allows for more of that grassroots activity
totally.
probably naturally. And so I think the approach that you've taken is brilliant to it isn't meant to be one channel. It's meant to
Yeah.
be across all channels. So that's great. I love it.
Yeah.
Um,
It's been fun to watch it grow.
yeah, so you told me a story before we started recording about your like I noticed you have the they them pronouns and you talk a little bit about how you kind of first came into Hugging Face and using pronouns, what that kind of opened up for the organization.
Yeah, I have been using they them pronouns for several years before joining Hugging Face. And the company that I was at before Hugging Face was a little baby 6-person company with me and a bunch of friends. So everyone knew me and pronouns mattered a little bit less. And so I didn't really think anything of it when I joined Hugging Face and introduced myself as Emily. I prefer they them pronouns. And then very quickly realized that I was the only person at the company using they, them pronouns. There were quite a few reasons for that. One being the company was very small, and there's a small percentage of people that use they, them pronouns. And the other reason is that we are a super global company. And our founders are French. And so we're pretty heavy on the French representation with our employees. And it is not a global experience for folks to have non binary pronouns.
Okay.
Um, I won't get into it too deeply, but there actually is a French minister of language who has actually refused to add non binary
Oh,
pronouns
wow.
to the French language. For tradition's sake, but that's a fully different conversation. And so there was a little bit of like one of the first trainings that I created at Hugging Face, even before I was focused on diversity work, was what is a pronoun, right? Like it was
Mm,
sort of 101, not meant to uh like it was also my first moment of thinking about how tackling diversity work at a global company is very
mm,
different than tackling diversity work at an American company.
mhm.
And so having to explain what a pronoun is, why people make different decisions about what pronouns they use, was refreshing in a way because I didn't get any pushback on it. Folks were like, "Oh, sweet, I learned a new thing. Thank you for sharing this with me." And now, fast forward 3 years later, we have several folks on the team that use they them pronouns, and very hopeful that when they joined, most folks understood this decision and had this like foundation set for them,
Yeah.
where they were like able to join with no questions asked.
Yeah.
We also don't have so the rules, the laws for collecting personal information are wildly different depending on which country you
Mm,
come from. The things that we can ask in the United States are actually very specific and very unique to the rest of the world. And so we actually, quote unquote, count. We the only data that we have to like look at the gender of our team as a company, we actually base off of pronouns, because when folks join, they add their name to our little like employee directory and they add pronouns. And so we don't say we have, 40% women, 60% men. We say we have, 60% of our team use he, him pronouns, 38% of our team uses she, her pronouns, and 2% of the team uses they, them pronouns, is how we talk
that's
about sort of our
awesome.
breakdown. So it's
That's
very
great.
self identification driven.
What other ways I like do most people have them on their Zoom um like you do, or is it just kind of a person like are y'all using it in any other way other than the metrics behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think that they show up in a couple of places and they're all pretty publicly available. I think the one that popped up to me is Slack is our main communication system,
Mhm.
and there is dedicated space for pronouns on Slack that I would say most people use.
Okay.
Part of being decentralized is that there are very few like you must do this at
Yeah.
Hugging
Yeah.
Face.
Yeah.
But I do think that most people have their pronouns filled in. And part of our culture, just sort of out of respect, is that folks will check before reaching out to somebody for the first time or just
Mm,
wanting to be thoughtful. It's pretty easy to find their preferred pronouns and use them in conversation.
that's great. I love that you created that 101. I mean, I think
Yeah.
as I mentioned earlier that I just being in a different generation, and now that there's so many generations in a workplace, I think education is the best way to at least give people the opportunity to be on the same page or to understand, so I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah, for sure. It seems most of the or any of the confusion that I've encountered at Hugging Face just comes down to having a conversation.
Yeah.
And it's been being so global has been such a wonderful experience, and it's also a big part of how we're doing diversity correctly. We're 350 people, and we're in about 35 different countries, and so we have amazing global representation. And DEI is different in every single one of those countries, and all of those countries have different cultures and work standards. And so thinking about how we come together at Hugging Face has been a really fun experience.
And how do you, with a decentralized organization and a global organization, what kind of are the levers that you use for culture to ensure that there is some consistency? But I understand that you're not mandating anything, but how do
Correct.
you,
Yeah.
or is culture the same as it would be in a centralized organization?
Yeah, I think it's a totally fair question. So, one of the ways that I think uh, the example I'm going to give is a little bit silly, but we also have a no meeting policy. So
Mm,
we have very, very, very few meetings at Hugging Face. And a lot of that just comes down to meetings generally are time wasters, specifically if you're talking about a weekly set meeting that
yeah.
happens no matter what. And our founders were very, very, very against sort of that like calendar creep happening
Hmm.
at Hugging Face. And then the second reason is, as I just discussed, we're so global. We don't want anyone feeling like they have to get up at 2 a.m. to join a meeting.
Right.
And so we rely very heavily on asynchronous communication, which has worked really well for us. But I use it as an example because our CEO will remind people of the no meeting policy like daily, like twice a day. Like there we almost play like Clem bingo because there are a couple of things relating to culture that he will remind people of over and over and over and
Mm,
over. And I actually think it's even just this repetition, like the simplicity
hmm.
of it has been really effective in just reminding folks like we don't have that many things that are important to our
Yeah.
core, culture here at Hugging
Yeah.
Face. But I'm going to say the four things that are important over and over and over and over and
Yeah.
over, and really drill them home. And the flip side of that is that because we're decentralized, we have this sort of core culture that is probably driven a lot by our CEO and then also our core values. But I will say that the sort of these micro cultures on each of our project teams is probably very different depending on the team that you're on. Part of the freedom that you're afforded at working at Hugging Face means that your team gets to operate in a way that works for you. And some ways might be some teams might do project reviews every 2 months or something like that, especially if it aligns with the work that they're doing. Whereas another team might decide that that doesn't make any sense and they do check ins weekly or something. It just sort of depends on your team structure, and what works for the 4 or 5 personalities within that little microculture.
That is so cool. I love that. I feel like I could just talk to you for 2 hours.
It's an interesting place to work. It's funny. It's different.
Yeah. Well, Emily, this has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate your time and sharing all the stories with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was so fun to chat about Hugging Face, and folks are interested in open source AI. I think they should check us out.
Absolutely. All right. Thank
Cool.
you.
Thank you, Wendy.